Sir, today I'm appearing as the agent and settler for David Hall.
So are you and David Hall one and the same person?
I'm not a person, I'm an individual.
Okay, when
I am
you
not
see the person, David Hall, tell him he's not leaving jail either, all right?
Sir?
If you think you can get him to shut up.
Do not tell me to shut up. I am the living natural man, and my voice will be heard.
Take him out.
What happens when people genuinely believe the rules don't apply to them? In this video, we're diving into the wildest sovereign citizen encounters ever caught on camera, tense traffic stops, chaotic courtroom showdowns, and moments that left judges, deputies, and police officers completely stunned. The Montana mountain man who turned a fishing ticket into a felony. Ernie Wayne Tertelgte of Manhattan, Montana had a specific look that matched his beliefs. He appeared in court dressed in buckskins, boots, and a tri-cornered hat, and at times arrived carrying a muzzle-loading musket. He called himself a natural living man and described his legal philosophy in florid 18th-century-style declarations. It would have been colorful and harmless had he not spent years turning minor citations into escalating confrontations with increasingly severe legal consequences. His first major encounter with the court system came in August 2013, when he was cited for fishing in a public lake without a license. Standing before Judge Wanda Drush in Three Forks City Court, he refused to enter a plea, rejected the very concept of pleading, and argued that he was a living natural man searching for food as permitted by universal law. When the judge ordered him to stop speaking, he declared that his voice would be heard and continued. He was held in contempt. His central argument in the courtroom concerned the gold-fringed American flag positioned near the bench. He pointed to it and declared it a Jolly Roger, the pirate's flag, arguing that its presence converted the courtroom into an admiralty tribunal operating under illegitimate commercial authority. He therefore refused to participate because no legitimate court was in session. When officers attempted to remove him, he refused to stand because doing so would constitute legal recognition of the court's authority over him. By November 2013, he was convicted by a jury on the fishing charge. He had been removed from the courtroom during the trial for repeatedly interrupting. The jury deliberated and found him guilty without ever hearing a coherent defense because he had spent the entire hearing arguing about the flag. By March 2016, his legal conflicts had escalated dramatically. He appeared in Eureka City Court facing charges of driving with a suspended license and obstructing a peace officer. During jury selection, Judge Stormy Langston held him in contempt and ordered him jailed. Officer Clint Heinz moved to escort him from the courtroom. Tertelgte grabbed the doorframe and refused to move. A physical struggle followed, in which he allegedly grabbed the officer's leg and pulled the badge from his uniform, throwing it across the floor. Officer Heinz later confirmed a sprained arm as a result of the struggle. Supporters had traveled from as far away as Wisconsin to attend the trial. That night, the Eureka Town Hall received so many hostile calls from Tertelgte's supporters that the answering machine ran out of space. The FBI assigned an agent from Kalispell to investigate potential threats. The assault on Officer Heinz elevated his situation from misdemeanor to felony territory. In April 2018, Tertelgte was arraigned in Montana's 19th Judicial District Court on a charge of felony assault on a peace officer, carrying a minimum sentence of 2 years and a maximum of 10 years in state prison, with fines up to $50,000. He entered a not guilty plea through his public defender, Liam Gallagher. At a separate hearing, he entered the court carrying a white flag marked "Truce," demanded that the judge recuse himself, and accused the entire justice system of operating as an international banking scheme that profits from legal proceedings. Court records confirmed he had previously filed for bankruptcy in federal court, a direct use of the court system he claimed to reject. When confronted with this contradiction, he said he had acted under duress due to medical debt and had no other option. He also stated that signing legal documents was an act of debasing the spirit, while acknowledging that he had signed because he had no alternative. The fishing trip that started all of this cost him $2 in license fees. The felony assault charge that ended the run cost him the possibility of a decade in prison. A man in a tri-cornered hat is going to prison over a fishing license. The next defendant tried a more sophisticated approach. He split himself in two. The man who was his own legal representative. In late 2014, David Hall appeared before Broward County Judge John J. Hurley in Fort Lauderdale, facing charges that included DUI, driving with a suspended license, driving on an expired tag, failure to maintain a single lane, and several other traffic violations. Instead of simply identifying himself as the defendant, David immediately launched into a bizarre identity argument. He claimed that he was appearing as the agent and settler for David Hall rather than as David Hall himself. When Judge Hurley asked whether he and David Hall were the same person, David insisted that they were not. He claimed he was an individual, while David Hall was a separate legal person that existed only on paper. According to David, the name David Hall was essentially a corporation, and he was merely acting as its representative. He argued that this distinction placed him outside the court's jurisdiction. David then attempted to bolster the theory by referencing a UCC filing and declaring himself the secured party associated with the name. He challenged the judge to explain the difference between a person and an individual, apparently believing this distinction was the key to escaping criminal liability. Judge Hurley responded with dry sarcasm. Rather than debating the theory, he summarized David's ever-expanding list of identities, joking that he was writing down the various titles so he could keep track of them. The judge remarked that David had presented similar arguments before, and implied that they were no clearer now than they had been previously. David next turned to another favorite among sovereign citizens. He argued that he had not been driving but traveling, attempting to distinguish ordinary movement from the regulated activity of operating a motor vehicle. Judge Hurley immediately folded David's terminology back into the charges. Using David's own language, he noted that whether David considered himself a settler, an agent, an individual, or a traveler, he was still accused of operating a vehicle on Florida roads without a valid license, and had allegedly done so repeatedly. As the hearing continued, the judge repeatedly summarized David's position in increasingly absurd terms, highlighting how little practical difference any of the labels made. The court was concerned with the conduct, not the word games. Eventually, Judge Hurley delivered the line that made the hearing famous. After reciting David's various claimed identities, he remarked that someone should tell the person David Hall that he would not be leaving jail either. The judge set bond at $10,000 and denied pretrial release. After David was removed from the courtroom, Judge Hurley apologized to public defender Dale Miller for the delay caused by the exchange. Miller commented that he hoped to understand the logic behind sovereign citizen arguments one day, but for the moment, they sounded like complete nonsense to him. The conversation became even more surreal when Hurley mentioned that sovereign citizens had previously issued their own judgment against him for $100,000. Miller jokingly asked whether he had started making payments. David's legal situation was far worse than the courtroom performance suggested. He had outstanding traffic obligations dating back to 2011, and the judge noted that he was already out on bond in separate felony and misdemeanor cases when he was arrested. In addition to the DUI allegation, David faced accusations involving an expired tag, a license plate assigned to the wrong vehicle, driving with a suspended license, and multiple unpaid traffic violations. The hearing originally aired in December 2014 and gained a much larger audience after resurfacing online in March 2016. The combination of David's increasingly convoluted identity theories and Judge Hurley's deadpan responses made it one of the most widely viewed sovereign citizen courtroom videos online. So if word games and agent-settler tricks won't work, what happens when an 18-year-old tries the same prove your jurisdiction demand and brings her whole family along for the ride? The teenager who made the whole courtroom erupt. On Tuesday, January 31, 2017, 18-year-old Keisha Johnson appeared in Judge Sean Delahanty's courtroom at the Jefferson District Court in Louisville, Kentucky. She was facing 3 charges: misdemeanor possession of marijuana, possession of drug paraphernalia, and tampering with physical evidence, a Class D felony under Kentucky law. When Judge Delahanty called her case, Johnson remained seated in the audience. The judge told her to come forward. Johnson replied that she preferred to stay where she was. The judge insisted that she stand at the podium. Johnson then demanded to know under what laws the court operated. The judge responded that the court followed the laws of the state of Kentucky. Judge Delahanty warned Johnson that he did not wish to create a scene and did not want to jail her, but he made clear that she had to approach the podium. Johnson asked if she could simply sit in the audience. The judge said no, reiterating that she had to come to the podium. Johnson eventually made her way to the front, but the confrontation only escalated. As the judge began to read the charges, Johnson interrupted, demanding that the court prove its jurisdiction and show her the law. The judge explained that all Kentucky laws are codified in the Kentucky Revised Statutes. Johnson dismissed that as insufficient proof of jurisdiction. The judge then responded that there was a very straightforward way to demonstrate jurisdiction. He could order the deputies to take Johnson into custody. Johnson apparently did not believe him. When the judge asked what she wanted to do about her case, she again demanded proof of jurisdiction. The judge replied that he was not required to prove jurisdiction and immediately ordered the deputies to take her into custody for disrupting the court. As deputies moved in to handcuff Johnson, her family members erupted from the gallery. One relative shouted that the court had no right to arrest her and invoked the Constitution. The outburst grew so severe that another family member was also taken away in handcuffs while continuing to yell at court officers. What had started as a routine drug hearing had turned into multiple people being physically removed from the courtroom. Johnson was charged with contempt of court on top of her original drug offenses. Under Kentucky law, contempt can result in a fine of up to $500, imprisonment for up to 6 months, or both. The video of the hearing quickly went viral, attracting millions of views. Johnson returned for a later pre-trial hearing, as documented in a video titled, "Sovereign Citizen Back in Court." What's the outcome? According to that video's description, a plea deal was on the table. After 3 hearings, Johnson accepted the agreement. The contempt charge remained on her record, but the underlying drug charges, marijuana possession, paraphernalia, and tampering with physical evidence were dismissed as part of the deal. Johnson was not incarcerated following the final hearing. The Jefferson District Court docket confirms that the drug charges were dismissed, and the contempt citation was resolved without additional jail time. After watching a teenager get handcuffed while her family screamed at the judge, one might think sovereign citizens would learn that refusing to sit down is a bad idea. But what about a defendant who doesn't refuse to sit? He refuses even to be the defendant, claiming he's only a witness. The defendant who refused to be the defendant. Henry T. Eldon faced multiple fraud-related charges in Charleston, South Carolina, after a traffic stop during which he reportedly claimed to be a private individual in a private vehicle and refused to comply with officers. When Henry arrived in court, he refused to sit at the defense table. Instead, he positioned himself in the audience and claimed he was merely a witness. Magistrate Narsburg repeatedly called Henry's name and ordered him to take his place as the defendant. Henry refused, insisting that he was only there as a witness and that the real defendant had chosen not to come forward. The judge called his name 3 times, but Henry continued to argue procedure and claimed the court could not proceed until a court reporter was present. After deputies escorted him to the front of the courtroom, Henry found a new point of resistance: the chair. The magistrate repeatedly ordered him to sit down. Henry repeatedly refused. He insisted he wanted to present information, claimed people could call him by different names, and abruptly began talking about recovering $25,000 that he believed was being held by the court. At that point, the magistrate warned him that he was disrupting the proceedings and would be held in contempt if he did not sit down. Henry still refused. As the judge began counting, a deputy moved in to arrest him. Even while handcuffed, Henry continued to challenge the deputy's authority, demanding identification, a badge number, and a warrant. The deputy explained that no warrant was necessary because the judge had just ordered Henry taken into custody for obstructing the judicial process. After further discussion, the court agreed to allow Henry to remain in the audience, provided that he spoke only when addressed. The hearing then moved to the charges. When asked whether he pleaded guilty or not guilty, Henry refused to answer directly and instead stated that he was appearing by special appearance. Rather than argue, the magistrate entered a not guilty plea on Henry's behalf and scheduled the matter for trial. Henry's entire strategy revolved around pretending he was a spectator rather than the defendant. He refused to sit at the defense table, refused to sit in the defendant's chair, refused to answer the plea question directly, and ended up in handcuffs before the court simply moved forward without him. Refusing to be the defendant earned that man a not guilty entry and a trial date. The next defendant tried to solve the same problem differently. He brought paperwork. The red light ticket that needed a cease and desist. In Ashland City, Tennessee, Matthew Aldridge appeared in municipal court on a routine traffic citation that should have taken only a few minutes to resolve. Instead, Matthew attempted to derail the proceedings with a series of sovereign citizen-style arguments centered on identity manipulation and self-declared legal authority. When Judge David Wolf called the case and asked whether he was the defendant, Matthew refused to provide a straightforward identification. Instead, he claimed he was the attorney of fact for a separate legal entity named Matthew Aldridge, positioning himself as acting on behalf of that name in the complaint rather than as the person charged. The judge immediately asked what that meant. Matthew explained it as a form of authorization to take legal action. Still, when pressed, he admitted he was not a licensed attorney and had no formal authority to represent another person. He also confirmed he had no power of attorney document. The judge responded directly that without such a document, Matthew had no legal authority to act on behalf of anyone in the courtroom. Despite this, Matthew continued insisting on his self-created role distinction, effectively trying to separate himself from the defendant named in the citation. The judge made clear that the court would not recognize this distinction and instructed him to stop attempting to bypass the normal process of identification and plea entry. Matthew then escalated the confrontation by submitting a printed document labeled as a cease order. In it, he attempted to command the court to terminate the proceedings immediately. The judge read the document aloud in open court, noting that Matthew himself signed it and explicitly demanded that the court halt the case. The judge dismissed the filing as having no legal effect and explained that a defendant cannot issue unilateral orders to stop a criminal proceeding. He further stated that the attempt to use improvised paperwork to block jurisdiction reflected a sovereign citizen-style misunderstanding of how criminal courts operate. At that point, Judge Wolf shifted from explanation to control of the courtroom. He instructed Matthew to stop speaking over the court. He warned that continued disruption would result in consequences, including bond revocation and immediate incarceration, if Matthew were, in fact, the defendant in the case. Faced with the possibility of being taken into custody, Matthew abandoned the attorney of fact framing and confirmed that he was indeed the defendant named in the complaint. Immediately after that confirmation, the dynamic of the hearing changed. The judge stated that due to a witness issue, the state was moving to dismiss the charges. The case was then dismissed, and Matthew was told he was free to go. A cease and desist against your own trial, and the case gets dismissed anyway. The next defendant added a weapon to the argument, a taser pointed at him. The bicycle ticket that ended at gunpoint. In July 2012, 22-year-old Robert W. Peterson was stopped while riding a BMX-style bicycle through Hayden, Idaho after dark without the required light and reflector. Robert later alleged that deputies were actually focused on a pistol strapped to his leg, which they noticed after illuminating him with a spotlight. Instead of treating the citation as a minor traffic matter, Robert escalated it into a sovereign citizen-style challenge, arguing that he was subject only to common law, not to federal, state, or local statutes. When Robert arrived at the Kootenai County Courthouse in August 2012, he brought a video camera and began recording. Court officers informed him that filming required judicial permission. Robert refused to stop recording. As officers blocked his entry, Robert advanced sovereign citizen arguments. claiming he was not a legal person and asserting that the court operated under admiralty and maritime jurisdiction. He further stated that he was a man rather than a legal person and claimed that engaging with the officers would create joinder. When asked directly whether he was human, Robert avoided giving a clear answer and reiterated his claim that he was a man. Officers repeatedly instructed him to comply and eventually cleared the courtroom to prevent disruption. Robert continued asserting that the court had no authority over him. Robert then attempted to force his way past the officers at the doorway. Video footage shows Robert lunging forward before a taser was deployed. He immediately fell to the ground and was taken into custody while shouting for officers to stop. After being subdued, Robert was arrested and charged with contempt of court and 3 counts of assault on a peace officer. Despite the arrest, he maintained that his recording would demonstrate the officer's misconduct. By November 2012, Robert entered an Alford plea to a misdemeanor contempt charge. The assault charges were dismissed after the video evidence showed he did not physically strike any officer. Even after the plea, Robert continued to challenge courtroom procedure. When Judge O. Lynn Brower entered for the sentencing hearing, Robert refused to stand. The judge issued an immediate near-contempt warning. Robert eventually stood. Brower sentenced him to 80 days in jail, credited him with 26 days already served, suspended the remainder, and placed him on 1 year of probation with $152 in court costs. The original bicycle citation had already been resolved by default. Robert had failed to appear for it while dealing with the aftermath of getting tasered. ABC News reported at the time that the sovereign citizen movement had an estimated 300,000 followers nationwide. That law enforcement considered the movement's trajectory one where a routine traffic stop could escalate to lethal violence depending on the individual involved. A bicycle light citation ended in a taser, $50,000 bail, and a suspended sentence. The next defendant skipped the physical confrontation entirely and chose a verbal one, which ended the same way. Silence is consent until it isn't. This sovereign citizen began the courtroom confrontation by telling a court officer that they were a public servant in breach of the public trust. When the officer did not respond, he asserted that silence constituted agreement, claiming that failure to answer amounted to consent, and that failure to dispute his claims would automatically result in default. He then challenged the officers to respond to his assertions, repeatedly maintaining that their silence meant acceptance of everything he had stated. When one officer finally replied that he disagreed, the sovereign citizen did not accept the response and instead demanded a detailed explanation of the disagreement, asking which specific points were being contested. He further insisted that the officer be placed under oath and made subject to perjury penalties before being allowed to disagree with him. When the judge entered the courtroom, the sovereign citizen immediately refused to comply with basic courtroom protocol and stated that he would not stand. He continued speaking over the judge, repeatedly attempted to object, and demanded that the cameras be turned off while invoking press-related rights. He also attempted to escalate the confrontation verbally while resisting instructions to stand down. The judge responded by ordering him to stand down and cease his conduct, issuing a direct command to regain control of the proceedings. The confrontation ended abruptly when court officers deployed a taser, subdued him, and removed him from the courtroom in handcuffs. After repeatedly asserting that court officers lacked authority over him, the encounter concluded with his physical removal. He was later charged with contempt of court, and additional charges such as obstruction or resisting arrest may have been considered, though the available record does not specify. Physical removal took seconds. In the Zoom era, judges discovered a more elegant solution: the mute button as a legal ruling. In a virtual Michigan court proceeding, Shannon Phillips appeared for what was listed as a probation violation hearing tied to unpaid court-ordered fees and restitution. Her probation was nearing its expiration. but she had not completed the required financial obligations, including signing a promissory note needed for discharge. When the judge called her case, Shannon remained silent despite being clearly present and unmuted. The court repeatedly attempted to confirm her identity, including by referencing the sovereign citizen-style identifier UCC 1308, all rights reserved. But Shannon offered no response. The UCC 1308 all rights reserved identifier is a classic sovereign citizen tactic. Under the Uniform Commercial Code, Section 1308 allows a party to explicitly reserve its rights when performing under protest, a provision designed for commercial contract disputes. Sovereign citizens have twisted this into a magical incantation that they believe exempts them from all government authority. They file UCC-1 financing statements naming their strawman, the all-caps name, as the debtor and themselves as the secured party, then claim that any court proceeding without their consent violates their reserved rights. Courts have uniformly rejected this theory. After several unanswered prompts, the judge noted the lack of participation, referenced the scheduled hearing time, and indicated that a bench warrant would be issued for failure to appear. At that point, Shannon abruptly broke her silence. "My name is capital S, lowercase h, lowercase, a lowercase n, lowercase n, lowercase o, lowercase n," she said, spelling out her first name letter by letter. The judge did not engage with the change in tone or the spelling display. Instead, the proceeding continued toward the issuance of the warrant. Shannon then questioned why a warrant was being issued while she was still present, but her objections were not addressed. Instead, the judge muted her audio, moved on to the next case, and ultimately removed her from the virtual courtroom. The mute button ended that one in under 2 minutes. The next defendant faced a judge who used the same tool, but only after listening to a full Admiralty law lecture. Maritime law at a bond hearing. Asher Edwards appeared at a virtual bond hearing facing serious charges, including making terroristic threats, assault with a deadly weapon, though not a firearm, obstructing police officers, and vandalism. From the start, Asher attempted to reframe the entire proceeding using sovereign citizen arguments, rather than addressing bail conditions or the allegations. He asked the judge whether the courtroom was operating under maritime admiralty law, insisting that all United States courts function under that system rather than constitutional authority. The judge immediately rejected the claim, but Asher continued pressing the same idea, arguing that the court was secretly processing him under a different legal framework. He then shifted to the all-caps name theory, claiming that Asher Edwards in all caps represented a fictional legal entity created without his consent. At the same time, his supposed true identity was a separate, constitutionally protected version of his name. This distinction was invoked to argue that the court lacked authority over him as a living individual. The judge did not engage with the theory and instead continued with the standard bond hearing procedure, while Asher spoke over him. Court records described the judge as remaining focused on paperwork, while Asher continued his monologue without interruption. Asher escalated further by attempting to redirect the hearing into unrelated claims and personal assertions, but the judge cut him off and instructed him not to speak. When Asher continued attempting to interrupt, the judge muted his microphone entirely, effectively removing his ability to disrupt the proceeding while the hearing continued in the background. With Asher silenced, the judge set bond at $72,500, citing the seriousness of the charges and standard risk and safety considerations. The judge then briefly unmuted Asher to confirm whether he understood the outcome. Asher responded with further sovereign-style language, stating that he did not stand under the court's authority. The judge muted him again and moved on, closing the matter without further engagement. Muted twice, bonded out for $72,000. The next defendant tried the most sophisticated paperwork strategy of all, and the charges got dropped anyway, for a completely unrelated reason. The red light ticket that reached the Ohio Supreme Court. Anthony Winston Mathesy appeared in Michigan's 44th District Court to contest a red light citation. Rather than addressing the ticket itself, he immediately challenged the court's identification of him as the defendant. When Magistrate William Urich stated that he was Anthony Winston Mathis, he rejected that framing. He claimed to be Anthony Mattis, describing himself as a living man appearing in a special capacity on behalf of a separate legal entity tied to the official name on the citation. He also attempted to distinguish between the living man and the all-caps legal name used by the court. Magistrate Urich did not engage with the identity theory and instead laid out the procedural options: admit responsibility with explanation, or deny responsibility and proceed to testimony. Anthony refused all three and attempted to redirect the hearing with questions rather than entering a plea. When instructed again to choose, he stated that he did not plead to anyone and only pleaded to the Most High while questioning the judge's identity and authority. Urich identified himself as a sworn judicial officer and reiterated that a plea was required for the hearing to proceed. Urich then moved forward with the case, calling Officer Moran to testify. The officer stated that Anthony drove through a red light while the signal was red for his direction of travel. Anthony did not directly dispute this account. Instead, he shifted the focus to procedural and constitutional objections, demanding the presence of an injured party and arguing that the Sixth Amendment required him to confront his accuser. The argument did not align with the nature of the case, as traffic infractions do not depend on victim testimony, and the citing officer was already present and had testified. Urich rejected the argument and clarified that there was no procedural requirement for an injured party to appear in a traffic infraction case. Anthony then escalated to broader jurisdictional challenges, questioned whether the court had authority over him, and attempted to interrogate the judge's status and the location of the city of Royal Oak. Each time, Urich declined to engage and returned to the underlying citation. After giving multiple opportunities for a substantive response, Urich found him responsible for the violation and imposed a fine of $175. When Anthony attempted to continue objecting, Urich terminated the exchange and concluded the hearing. The proceeding ended without Anthony addressing the actual traffic allegation or disputing the officer's testimony, as the court resolved the matter based on the evidence already presented and disregarded the sovereign citizen-style jurisdictional arguments. All of these defendants talked their way into handcuffs or fines. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.